Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Alexander Davidson. I'm the president of Manchester TUC,
Okay.
and I've occupied that position since I was first elected to it just this year.
Okay, I see. Can you tell us a bit more about the McStrike
Mhm.
initiative?
Well, the McStrike comes out of a bigger initiative that was really spun out of the United States.
Okay.
I think the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union have been leading the way on it here. They've been inspired by a lot of what's gone on in the USA over the last 6 years since the $15 an hour minimum wage movement started there just after Occupy Wall Street. It
I
was one
see.
of the many initiatives that span out of Occupy Wall Street when that was crushed quite physically by the American state agencies. But it did spawn all these initiatives. $15 an hour movement was one of them. It really took off in the fast food industry over there, and it took off over here as well. And the aim of it is to address very, very low pay in not just McDonald's, but all the other fast food chains as well. Lack of any real workers' rights, even the rights that workers in this country are legally entitled to, very poorly enforced, if at all, inside McDonald's. And of course, the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, BFAWU for short, is leading the way in terms of wanting to actually unionize these occupations in a way they never had been before.
Okay.
So that's what it was really all about, really low pay, poor conditions, but also the need for a recognized trade union in McDonald's UK operation.
I see. So do you think you will be able to capitalize on that movement started initiated in the US?
I think it's taking off here. What you've seen and in recent years, and the reason why this is taking off now is because the nature of the workforce in the fast food industry has changed. 30 years ago, it would have been young workers just doing it for a few months at a time. And now you're seeing more and more young
Permanent.
workers becoming semi-permanent or
I
permanent.
see.
They can't get jobs elsewhere. So really, the fast food industry has gone from something which cycled over employees at a huge rate to being something with a slightly more settled workforce now. And with a slightly more settled workforce, people are less likely to accept poor wages, poor conditions, and management mistreatment. So
I see.
it's inevitable that in those circumstances, even working class people with very low knowledge of the politics of the labour movement or trade union movement will look to organise. Workers in any circumstance where they are exploited always look to organise.
Okay.
And thankfully, there's unions in this country like the BFAWU with an interest in actually organising them.
Okay. Why McDonald's specifically?
Firstly, I think it's easily the biggest operation in the UK in terms of its actual staff numbers, profits, and
If I'm not
turnover,
mistaken, it's
etc.
85,000
Yeah,
staff
huge,
members.
huge number of people, and it's a big name. You
Yes.
know, you go into McDonald's and cause the first strike in UK history in that operation. It's something which can act as a real conduit to bigger things in the rest of the fast food industry. By targeting the biggest fast food chain, the unions can actually make headway in other chains as well because everybody will see it.
Okay.
A good example is that we held a demonstration in support of the McStrike, organised by Manchester TUC and others outside of the McDonald's down in Piccadilly Gardens.
Okay.
And the amount of young people like below the age of 20, coming up and actually wanting to know what was going on, because why is there a demo outside of McDonald's?
Yes.
It catches people's attention and imagination.
I see. So by focusing on the standard bearer of the fast food industry, you really think that you can have some sort of ripples across the industry?
Hopefully so.
Yeah.
It's necessary because the fast food industry and catering industry in general is one of the things that's grown massively in the UK over the last 30 years.
Yes.
And yet it's an area with very low levels of unionisation, very poor pay and very insecure employment conditions. So it's an area that the union movement urgently needs to organise in, and hopefully this is the start of something much bigger.
I see. Or the 0 hour contracts, would you say it's one of the biggest impediment to maybe workers empowerment in the fast food industry?
I think it's one barrier.
Yes.
0 hours contracts are just a much updated name of a very old phenomenon in the workplace, though, which is the casual contract.
Yeah.
It's not that much different to the way that building workers and dock workers were treated 50, 60 years ago, which is that you don't get a contract, the manager just picks out who he wants for that day.
For that shift.
And that's just updated now. It's just that instead of men lining up on the docks, it's people waiting by the phones for a text message.
Yes.
Are they going to get any hours this week? And that is an impediment to organising, because trade union organising often works better with a settled and more secure workforce.
I see.
But at the same time, where there is an extreme condition like the sheer amount of people on 0 hours contracts, but also limited hours contracts, so somebody could have what is technically not a 0 hours contract because they could be employed for 4 hours a week.
Okay.
For instance, when I worked in supermarkets when I was a student, I was technically had a contract for 4 hours a week,
Okay.
but I was working 30, 35, sometimes more than that, but there was no overtime rate.
Yes.
So over the last 35 years, you've seen the growth in terms of limited hours contracts, but also the disappearance of overtime payments.
Yeah.
So it's a factor that can hinder you, but also it's going to be a motivating factor for those workers to want to get something better for themselves.
Okay.
What it takes is a more creative approach than maybe we've been using in the past to these workers, not just because of their unlimited hours contracts, but because you have a whole generation that's grown up not with the same knowledge of the trade union movement as their parents would have done. So in the 70s in this country, like the trade unions were in the news all the time. They were household names through the media, but they were also embedded in every working class community, was the trade union and labour movement in a way that it hasn't been over the course of my lifetime. Okay. So the question is, how do we best respond to that? How do we organise these new groups of workers with limited knowledge of the union movement who might not even know what a trade union is? And the encouraging thing from the McDonald's dispute is, well, they might not know what a trade union is now, but it doesn't take them long to pick it up and find out.
Yes.
The basic idea that human beings combining together to organise against exploitative conditions is one that anybody, anywhere in the world can grasp in a matter of seconds. Doesn't matter whether they're working for an Apple subcontractor in China, whether they're working in a South African platinum mine, or they're working in a fast food industry place in Britain or America. The same principle applies, and working class people pick it up just as quickly and easily anywhere.
An injury to one is an injury to all.
Yeah, and it's something that people instinctively understand.
I see. So you said that it's an industry that lacks organization, as in there's a lack of, there's a low union membership. Could you give us an estimate for the fast food industry? Do you have any idea?
I would say it's almost before recent efforts, it would have been almost non-existent.
Okay.
Because the big fast food chains in this country it's just never been done. Before the last 5 years and the initiative taken by the Bakers Union, it's something that the unions haven't been engaged in at all.
I see.
And that's one of the big problems that we've had.
So do you think it's only a lack of information for the workers, or is there maybe some conscious policy by the management?
It's definitely a conscious policy. The management of these industries that have come to be huge in the UK economy are very aware of the fact that their profits are based on a super exploitative model of doing business, and they would be fanatically opposed to any unionisation efforts, as you've seen by the fact that many of the workers who start doing organising in the fast food industry have to do so in secret.
Yes.
They can't do it out in the open.
They risk being laid off.
Yeah, they fear being laid off. They fear being targeted by the management. Or if a management is slightly more clever, if they're on a limited hours contract, they might not just get any more hours.
I see.
But they don't get a call to come into work anymore. And that's a cleverer method of the management dealing with these things, because they can say, well, we've not sacked you, we just haven't given you any work for the last month. And then people get desperate and they leave under their own volition. So it's a lot of the UK economy now is predicated on low wages, apparently low skilled jobs that are hyper exploitative. And that's the model of the UK economy that not only the employers have an interest in defending, but the government has an interest in defending too, because that's what the Conservative Party's aimed for, certainly since the Thatcher era.
I see. So since we're on the topic of the fast food industry, do you think that automation is it a threat or a boon to workers' rights?
Depends on the regime.
Yes.
Automation
As
could...
it is?
as it is, under the circumstances of modern capitalism, automation will be used as every technological innovation has been used under capitalism, which is to employ less workers and to make more money. And that's the same whether it's the move from the hand loom to the automated spinning machine in the cotton industries 200 years ago, whether it's the move from steam engines to diesel trains, whether it's the move from a system of communication based on telephone lines and sending letters to the modern day internet.
So it will only serve, you think, as to replace workers and drive profit margin?
It will do. There's a contradictory thing within capitalism with regard to new technology. It creates this huge potential for labor-saving devices. But given that capitalism only really makes money by exploiting workers, then it always is limited in the way that it can actually apply labor-saving devices. So that's why you have the contradictory nature of the British economy now, which is where the government talks about high-tech industries, but you have people doing jobs that could have easily have been automated years ago. And we also have an incredibly low level of labour productivity in this country because the British capitalists are fatally addicted to low skill, low wage, long hour, hyper exploitative ways of making their money. So it doesn't even unleash the potential of new technology in full. Because the way that British capitalism is structured actually holds that back. Now, if you were under a socialist system where there was a better degree of economic planning, of democratic economic planning, then you could use automation to actually liberate people. It's been a long part of multiple schools of socialist thought that labour-saving devices could be used to free humanity, to remove class divisions, and also enable working class people to have access to what in bourgeois terms would be known as higher culture. There's an old piece by Friedrich Engels where he writes about whether a working man could do work in the fields in the morning, office work in the early afternoon, and do literary criticism in the evening. Now I just give that as a historical example of something of a dream that the socialist movement has long had. And I think that if we did actually move to a socialist system, we could more easily see something like that use of automation to actually come through to benefit the overwhelming majority. But as long as we remain under a capitalist system, it's going to be used in the same way that every other labour-saving device has been used.
As the president of the TUC, would you say you advocate for a socialist society?
I do, certainly. I think many of us in the Manchester TUC would describe ourselves as socialists. The trade union movement itself has many different opinions within it, so I'm speaking personally as myself, as from my own point of view. I am a Marxist, I am a socialist, I do believe in the transformation of society to a socialist system. I think that anybody who's paying any attention to the way that the world is in the workplaces, the way that the employers run things, to draw socialist conclusions would be inevitable under those circumstances if you're actually paying attention to the work that you're doing.
I see. Regarding the initiative, let's call it the McStrike, what is the schedule? What are your upcoming events, prospects?
Well, what the Bakers Union is looking to do at the moment is to get the word out there to try and organise more people. At the moment, the strikes were in 2 stores in the south of England. This time round, just gone. So there's now a real need to get more stores organised, and that's where the efforts are going into at the moment, to getting the word out there about joining a trade union, about getting organised, about taking strike action. And one of the things we're going to be supporting is getting organisers out there to as many different places as possible to actually talk to workers and actually encourage them to join the trade unions. Because next time something happens, we would want it to be better supported everywhere. We want to make sure that in this city, Manchester, which is where we're responsible for organising and assisting organising efforts in, that we want to get as many workers as possible inside the trade union movement, because this city gave birth to many of the English trade unions, and we want to make sure that tradition is carried on. So one of our efforts are going to be around organising in this next period.
Don't you fear that intervening in the workplace might bring about some retribution, or that the employers will not be as keen on listening?
It's a difficult process, and I wouldn't want to paint it as anything other than that. You've got to be careful about how you approach these things. Often you have to talk to workers in precarious industries outside of the workplace. You can't just, some union organisers can go in and just talk to them, but you've got to assess the situation as to how can you talk to these workers without putting them at too much risk.
I see.
How can you organise in a way where the employer cannot respond in a hostile fashion until you've got a sufficient level of organisation to defend those workers? Because one of the worst things that you could do was go in loud and brash,
yes,
and then not have those workers in a position where they can defend themselves and defend their jobs. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that if it does come to a fight, that the workers are actually capable of defending themselves.
Would you say you're optimistic on the prospects of organising the...
I think so. I think the time's come around when more people are going to be open to the ideas of trade unionism. More people are going to be looking at an organised workplace and thinking, well, why can't we have better hours? Why do we have to work on low-hour or zero-hour contracts? Why is our pay barely above the minimum wage at a company which is making multi-million pounds worth of profits every single year?
Yes.
And I think that the future for trade unionism in these industries can be a very bright one if we approach it in the right way, and if we work hard enough at it, and if we have an approach to these workers which they respond positively to.
Okay.